Hello there, and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're well and having a beautiful day. In today's video, I'm going to share with you some things I used to do when I first started quilting, and it was one of the best ways I reckon that you can manage your scraps and have it so organized. And I was looking back at one of my scrap quilts, and I can tell you a little secret. I didn't like to make scrappy quilts at all, but obviously you gather the fabrics, don't you? And so you've got to do something with them. Anyway, so I am looking through here my scrap bins, and what is that big piece of batting doing there? Anyway, I don't know. How did that end up in there? Again, this is why you need to really sort of get the scrap management done. Share with me down below, what is your scrap management? How do you manage to keep it organized? I have three bins here, and no matter how much I try to keep strips and squares separate, it just ends up in the same bin. So I'm selecting a few pieces here to share with you what I used to do and how I made the quilt I'm going to show you. And it was such an easy method to use. And I am punishing myself now, looking at all the mess as to why I don't do it properly. So let's get started and I'll share with you what I used to do to manage my scraps and make a scrap quilt. All right, so here is my collection here of some of the fabrics that I've picked out to demonstrate to you what I do. So my method at one time was once I finished with a quilt, I would take all of the pieces, lay them out like such, and then I will sew them together in random orientation. It didn't really matter what the colors were and what sort of design I had previously from the quilt, or even if it's a full patch or something as an oblong cut like this. So what I will do is sit there and make some blocks together. So for example, something like this here, this is a nice block, very pretty, random colors together, but yet it kind of looks really well. So that is sort of one of my techniques. So just lay them out on the counter just to manage your scraps a little bit better and fit them in. Something like this, again, I'll put these two together up there, and then this one here, I will align like so. Sew it off, and then I will trim around there, and then I have a block. I love this particular color here, so again I will sew these two together and then I would line them up and sew. Now my technique is I'm not concerned about what size the block is once I make it. I can always build it up. Okay, I don't necessarily work with something like this on its own. I will literally add, as I said, something next to it on the other side top. I will add pieces anywhere. So that is my technique for making my scrappy quilt. So let me show you what I have come up with and what I have done so far, and then we'll take it from there. Just found this piece and I think it's ideal. Now, this was obviously made some time ago, but I wouldn't use it as is. I will literally cut this into probably four, or probably cut it from point to point as an X, and then use it from there. Again, what it does is give you a different view of how you can use the scrap rather than making it sort of piece together in this format. So you're going to have cuts of half square triangles, and then you can build a block around it. So again, they may come at something like this. So even with this one here, I could possibly cut in half and then add blocks around it. All right, so just to give you an idea of how an easy step, I don't know what your scrap method is, but this is what I do. All right, so here is the quilt. So what I have done is taken all of the pieces, as you can see here. It's very colorful. Now, when I first started making scrap quilts, I used to really hate all of the colors. I always felt that it was just too much colors, looking back at me, and it just looked really confusing. So I had to find a way to manage it for me, for my growth, so that I know how to work with lots of different combination of vibrant colors, contrast, etc. So what I did here was to use a piece of cream fabric and I just bordered each of the quilt. Now, if you notice, it's kind of offset. I didn't really line it up properly. I left it offset because I didn't want it to be like block line up horizontally. But it turned out really good, really, really good. It did boost my confidence. It did teach me how to manage using up my scraps. That particular block I just showed you, that was loads of scrap practice in order to make a sawtooth star, and I was working out. But I managed to put it into the quilt to make sure, and I put it in all four corners of the quilt, and it looked really, really nice. I was really pleased with that. I just really loved how the fabric worked out really well. That particular bare pieces that I put again that in all four corners, as you can see, just to make sure I sort of tidied it just to make sure it looks kind of uniform. And I think you can play around with the scraps and place them in a way that makes the quilt looks cohesive and well put together. Did some really small pieces of piecing there, added that four patch in, and yeah, just use, lines again in that particular block. So anything that had sort of straight visual appeal, I added it into, and I really, really tried was to bring it all together. But it was difficult when I made this particular quilt because I didn't like the colors, as I said. It was just so troubling to my eyes. But nevertheless, I added it in. I put a bit of Halloween and print in there as well. Some tiny pieces I pieced together. And again, guys, this method I used was when I made a quilt, whatever piece I had, I would just make a scrap piece together and I would just stack it on top each other. So I had at least quite enough to make a large quilt. So that's why I decided was to put it all together. But again, it was so random. Hence the reason again why I put, look, Christmas fabric as well in there. Why I actually put the cream border around each of it. But it was nice. I enjoyed doing it. It really helped me to manage my scrapped really nicely because in this instance, I didn't have loads of strips in my box as I showed you at the beginning of the video. And with this method of just making the scraps and stacking them into a block really works. And you can pick and choose which one you want to use, and you can either build up the size or trim the size down. But most of the times I did build up the size, and you can make the scrap um block as large as you want, you know, but it worked. It really worked. So I want to get back into this sort of scrap management whereby it's so much more organized and it's so much more peaceful to make a scrap quilt because it's already done for you, isn't it? And storage as well is going to be easy rather than having them into those three bins that I showed you. But let's move on to what it looks like quilted. And hopefully you fall in love with it as much as I did. So let's go get it quilt. Yeah, it was a really happy process making this quilt. It was my very first, very, very first scrap quilt I made. All right, so let's move on and I'll show you what it looks like once it's all quilted. All right, so it's completed now. Let's have a look at this beautiful quilt. On the borders, you can see I just use, I think it's about 4 inches, and I actually use the same color for the binding. And I just did some X quilting alongside it. But looking at the whole quilt, it looks absolutely amazing. There are 35 blocks in this particular layout. And also, I don't know if you can notice, but the lines of the 2-inch strips here, they're offset, as I mentioned earlier. Now, there is a lot of quilting in this particular quilt. There was a little bit of a madness to the layout. Okay, so in the corners, I had the koala bears there. And I also, I think, randomly placed or alternatingly placed the sawtooth and one there as well, one over there. Lots and lots and lots of quilting in this particular pebbles placed a very prominent feature for quilting in this particular quilt. All right. So it was literally used as a filler to really pull the whole block together. Looks really lovely. Really, 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 really lovely. I do have my favorite blocks here. I did some, I think, serpentine lines there. Again, the feathers again there. You know, and sometimes they were just really random quilting, just literally to fill the pieces. I loved these areas here, you know, they're really small, but I just like flower, feather. Again, just making it up as I go along. In this corner here is the other koala bear, and I did some swirls there. Again, top and bottom where there's a sawtooth. And one of the reasons why this sawtooth is there is because I didn't like it at the time I made it. I made, I think it was 8 blocks. I've put 6 in here in this particular quilt, just random piece in here together. But again, this is what makes it a scrappy quilt. And do remember that the method I used, whereby once I was finished with the quilt, whatever quilt I was making, I will simply just put it together, some random blocks. But it does look good once you place them all together. Right, I love this particular one here. Just look like a Christmas tree somehow. My favorite block in this quilt is this one here. A little bit of minute crumb quilting to put the pieces together, but look at that. The motif with the quilting, just absolutely beautiful. Random, but it works. Very, very lovely. Some large pebbles here, surrounded by some tiny pebbles. You know, I thought the quilt would have been heavy. It is a little bit structured, I'll definitely tell you that. And what I mean by structured, it's, you can see it's made to last. That's what I mean by that. It doesn't feel flimsy or light. It just feels really heavy duty. And, you know, you can wash this 100 times and it will still be fine. Other koala bear in the corner. And for the borders, as you can see, I use this floral, and again, back to the yellow, but it's the way how it comes together. It looks really, really lovely. Also love this here with the crumb quilting here as well. Looks pretty good. Overall, I am very pleased with the outcome. Very, very pleased with the outcome. And again, just to show you that over time, your quilting actually grows. You get so much better when you make your quilts. And again, I was, you know, going through my quilts and I looked at this and I was like, wow, I must share this with you guys. Really, really awful, awesome. On the back, you can see all of the quilting because I just use this black and white print. But you can see it coming through very, very well. I also made some pillows, some scrappy pillows as well. And they themselves look really, really, really lovely. Really big ones that I actually made. But overall, beautiful project. Love, love, love this scrappy quilt. This quilt actually made me fall in love with scrappy quilts. There's another one I need to show to you, but I'll show it to you probably next week. But just amazing. Can't remember the size as I'm speaking to you now, but I'll put the size on the screen. But I do know that there's 35 blocks in this quilt. Beautiful scrappy quilt. It's online on Etsy for sale if you'd like to buy it. Or you can make one using my method. All right, again, let's look at the back of all these quilting. Amazing, isn't it? Amazing, amazing, amazing. I always say quilting really always surprised me. It doesn't matter. It just always gives me this ecstatic feeling of accomplishment, and especially when you put a scrap quilt together. So share with me down below your scrap quilts. Tell me your method you use for your scrapping and how you make your quilt. I'd love to know your method, you know. Look at these motifs here. Amazingly beautiful. Look at that. All right, guys. So bye for now. Happy quilting, and I'll definitely see you in the next video. Have a good one, guys.
giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here.